Dark fantasy has always been one of the most beloved genres in the game, with its extensive settings, dystopian societies, morally complex stories, and fantastical elements with an impending sense of doom. And Japanese animation's contributions to the game aren't just Berserk and Tokyo Ghoul. That said, those stories do lay a solid foundation for other writers to build on. While reading Tokyo Ghoul, we initially expected ghouls to be evil due to Riza's impression, but over time we came to terms with how the ghouls literally can't eat anything else, and some still feed on dead bodies instead of good meat. Controversial though it may be, good dark fantasy makes you really think. Unfortunately, there are multiple such animated works that tick almost all of the boxes for dark fantasy that are either neglected by the common folk or need to be resurrected. That's why we've brought you today's video, 10 forgotten dark fantasy anime that deserve a resurrection. Let's get into it. Claymore, 2007. We're starting this list off strong with Norihiro Yagi's Claymore, a show that's been explored in detail on this channel already. It's one of the bigger names within the dark fantasy umbrella thanks to its very grim medieval setting reminiscent of Berserk. Despite its heavy footing within the genre, we don't think Claymore is very prominent in the mainstream, at least for those who are not actively seeking out dark fantasy. The story is set on a medieval island where humans are hunted by humanoid shapeshifting monsters known as the Yoma. These monsters are hunted by female warriors who are half human and half Yoma. Created by a faction known as the Organization, they charge a fee to cull the threats, and they're referred to as the titular Claymores due to the heavy swords that they carry. The usage of swords and ever-present sword battles adds weight to its position as a dark fantasy, all while they go through inner struggles to not become monsters themselves, as, like the Yoma, the Claymores too draw their powers from a demonic energy known as Yoki, which amps one up with enormous strength and the ability to shapeshift. Crossing a certain threshold of power as a Claymore draws Yoki from their Yoma side and can cause one to awaken and become a super predator with an absurdly high appetite for humans to the point that they can put the Yomas to shame. This situation is generally averted by getting one Claymore to kill another before they can awaken, but here's the catch. No Claymore can permanently resist this transformation as they're doomed to awaken eventually. You can see how every Claymore must succumb to their tragic fate for the sake of protecting humanity from Yomas. Of course, there is the catch, where a Claymore can temporarily unleash the power of an awakened state and revert back to their original form, but this has a time limit, and each Claymore is destined to awaken as the excess Yoki they rely on for their strength takes a huge toll on their minds. And to say that these abilities aren't systemically exploited in the world of Claymore would be foolish. In conclusion, you've got a grim setting, tragic heroes, and an air of despair throughout the show. It's very much a world where you die a hero or live long enough to become the villain, but this is a world where you have to survive by hook or by crook, and the titular Claymores prove to be nothing but tools who must sacrifice themselves for the sake of humanity's continued well-being. Texhnolyze, 2003. Texhnolyze is first and foremost a cyberpunk anime, owing to its nature as a dark sci-fi and psychological thriller, more so than a stereotypical dark fantasy, specifically because its fantastical element is futuristic technology instead of something supernatural as one would expect from traditional fantasy. But if we take magic and mythical creatures out of the equation, Texhnolyze hits a lot of the necessary boxes, such as a dystopian grim world, a corrupted society, nihilism, brutal violence, and more. In fact, Texhnolyze truly is drenched in nihilism to the point that there's no room for hope. It strives to not add any meaning to life in a story about a pro boxer who loses his arm and a leg. The story takes place in the underground city of Lux, which, contrary to its name, has awful infrastructure but is vibrant with life nonetheless. Multiple influential divisions operate within this city, namely the professional conglomerate of the Organo, with deep ties to the underworld, the cybernetic prosthesis business of the Texhnolyze, a group of technolyzed youth with cybernetic enhancements known as the Recon, and the fanatical populist group called the Salvation Alliance that opposes the Organo. At some point, protagonist Ichize loses his arm and leg to satisfy a promoter, and alongside other important characters such as Ran and Keigo Onishi, deals with major events that can break the city and its people. It's after Ichize loses his limbs that he becomes subject to the next evolution of Texhnolyze and is subsequently enhanced, but this only throws him into a war for control over the city of Lux. But Ran can see multiple futures, ends up discovering that Lux is on the brink of destruction. The stakes are too high, which gives Texhnolyze its dark fantasy-like atmosphere, as regular cyberpunk doesn't truly revolve around mass destruction of an entire group of people. For us, it's the soul of Texhnolyze that makes it akin to a dark fantasy, even if it has the body of a cyberpunk. There's a sentience to the city of Lux, and it's nearing its end. It must be saved, but there's literally no hope. The same cannot be said for cyberpunk, as it, as a genre, is only meant to show a technologically advanced dystopian society. It's not not necessarily supposed to show us large-scale destruction and hopelessness. There's always hope, no matter how dark the premise is, but dark fantasy is where nihilism takes center stage. Texhnolyze, at least within Japanese animation, is the one that does hopelessness most faithfully. Wolf's Rain 2003. Bones Studio released Keiko Nobumoto's Wolf's Rain in 2003, exploring a story that revolves around the journey of lone wolves crossed paths with one another during their search for paradise while they followed the scent of the lunar flower. But civilization is crumbling in this world, and if there's something the characters go through, it's identity crises. The story is based on a fictional lore about how when the world ends, paradise will appear, but paradise is a place that only the wolves will know how to find. Except in this world, wolves have been hunted to near extinction over the past 2 centuries. The select few who still live continue to survive via illusions make them appear as humans. The OVA has the lone wolves Kiba, Sume, Hige, and Tobo escape Jaguara City with their human companions who are accompanying them on the way to find paradise. Not only is Jaguara City chaotic, but the earth is falling into its own destructive patterns. A series of misfortunes follows, with multiple character deaths, including the wolf named Tobo getting accidentally shot to death. Eventually, the likes of Hige, Sume, and Blue are also killed. Ultimately, Kiba battles the wolf known as Darcia over which one of the two will get to open paradise, but in the process, Kiba is mortally wounded. Darcia ends up dying when he tries to enter paradise due to not being a true wolf, but it's only when Kiba's fallen peer Chase's seeds grow after a rainfall that he notices how the seeds have turned into lunar flowers. Ultimately, Chase's death becomes the cause behind paradise and the world being reborn, but this new world isn't free from corruption either, as we see it taking root in paradise. We've got drama. We've got a depressing setting as we're introduced to a dying world. There are supernatural elements, there's destruction, there's the fleeting farce of hope, and there's ultimately a somewhat bittersweet ending, making Wolf's Rain a perfect fit in the world of dark fantasy. It's conceptually a bit unusual, but we don't think that should deter anyone from giving stories like this a shot. After all, a fantastical setting that mirrors the most realistic and humane of emotions is truly an evergreen combination in writing, and what truly cements Wolf's Rain as media deserving of the highest praise for us is how paradise is proven to be something that exists, but it only comes at the cost of annihilation. Shiki 2010. This 2010 anime that adapts Fuyumi Ono's novel series of the same name takes place in Sotoba, an isolated town in rural Japan. This town has seen consecutive deaths, as bizarre as they come, and it all seems to have started following the arrival of the Kirishiki family in the outskirts castle. Investigations are subsequently carried out by the dean of Sotoba's hospital, revealing the presence of supernatural elements contributing to this negative phenomenon. Unfortunately for regular humans, these elements are vampires or corpse demons known as Shikis. The deaths we see in the show are tragic, with young girls as victims who are found lying dead in the forest. Some of the kids, such as Natsuno, experience repeated attacks from these creatures, with adaptations portraying him as someone who's transformed into a special category of Shiki known as the Jinro, which is similar to a Dhampir. Overall, the existence of vampires puts Shiki not just in the dark fantasy category, but also under the horror umbrella. But the story heavily witnesses continued moral conflicts between the humans and the Shikis, violence, a sense of impending doom, and the possibility of large-scale destruction. So if you're on the lookout for dark fantasy, Shiki is likely to end up in your good books if you give it the time it deserves. Our favorite element of this as a dark fantasy is the implementation of folklore horror and its presentation in a setting that's more catered towards the modern audience. Record of Lodoss War 1990. Now, this is less of a regular anime. Record of Lodoss War is originally a high fantasy and adventure game that takes direct inspiration from tabletop role-playing games such as Dungeons & Dragons. Its connection with anime comes from its OVA that was released in 1990. The premise is simple. More so than dark fantasy, it's high fantasy, with quests, adventures, fantasy tropes, mythical creatures, magic, and even character classes such as elves, dwarves, mages, gods, and so on. It's stereotypical in the sense that the heroes fight monsters using swordplay and magic. This begs the question, if Record of Lodoss is so stereotypically high fantasy, why did we decide to put it on a list about dark fantasy anime? Our explanation is simple, and it's the same one we used for Texhnolyze. The emotional impact of Record of Lodoss mimics a dark fantasy. The world of Lodoss is one that's been impacted by ancient wars, long-standing curses, and more. The high fantasy quests aren't just out of adventure, but out of necessity in a world that is seen mean darkness. It's also the blueprint and inspiration behind dark elves in Japanese media. The plot follows the adventures of Parn, the son of a dishonored knight who wants to find out the truth behind what happened to his father to restore his family's honor. Not saying that this is the darkest thing in the world, but as you can tell, Parn's motivation behind his adventures isn't exactly sunshine and sparkles. There are more existential plot points, specifically ones revolving around Parn's love interest, Deedlight. A high elf from the Forest of No Return, Deedlight wanted to find the answers behind the isolationism of her people, which was leading to their extinction. In conclusion, Record of Lodoss War has dark undertones, and with its emphasis on Parn and Deedlight's motivations, it ticks many necessary boxes to be a dark fantasy. But yes, it does fall on the lighter end of that spectrum. Trinity Blood, 2005. Sunao Yoshida's light novels found their animated interpretation with the 2005 release of Trinity Blood. The story is set 900 years in the future. This is a post-apocalyptic world that's witnessed war between vampires and humans. At present, the world has succumbed to a cold war between the human government, the Vatican, and the new human empire. There's also the antagonistic government of the vampire Methuselah. Right off the bat, you can see how deeply Trinity Blood is drenched in dark fantasy, and it should be right up your alley if you love vampires and storylines involving the same, like Vampire Hunter D, Hellsing, Castlevania, and so on. For us, Abel Nightroad is what truly makes Trinity Blood special. He's a vampire fighting on the side of the Vatican, crazy as that may sound, as Dracula, aka the OG vampire, literally means the son of the devil. But Abel is a Crucinik, and as such, a vampire that feeds on other vampires, explaining why the Vatican needs him. The Methuselah, on the other hand, are vampires who drink human blood. We had to pick one thing that made us really ride or die for Trinity Blood. It wouldn't be the factions or the premise, but the lore behind their existence. For example, the existence of the two specific types of vampires is due to humans attempting to colonize Mars following a population boom. During this time, humans discovered the Crucinik nanomachines, creating the Cruciniks, but they also discovered the Bacillus virus, creating the Methuselahs. With war taking over, however, the Earth was led into an Armageddon which took place 900 years before the events of the story. Trinity Blood has a lot of back and forth between humanity and the inhuman supernatural beings who ironically used to be human at one point, at least generationally. But the Methuselah aren't evil for the sake of it, they're just what the world turned them into. If you haven't already locked into Trinity Blood, you really need to. After all, nothing makes a dark fantasy more intriguing than moral ambiguity that messes with your ideals. Chrono Crusade, 2003. Daisuke Moriyama's Chrono Crusade is one of the entries we were most excited to get to on this list. It's set in the time of New York's roaring 20s and follows the story of a woman named Rosette Christopher and her partner Chrono, except Chrono is a demon. The premise has a fictional organization known as the Order of Magdalene operating from beneath the superficial glamour of the Great Gatsby era. Chrono and Rosette are both part of it and fight demons together. Both characters have shady pasts, and Rosette in particular is in search of her brother Joshua, who's seemingly been taken away by a demon who has history with her lover, and his goal is to overthrow the balance between the three realms of heaven, earth, and hell. With demons and darkness, you can see why Chrono Crusade fits the bill for this list. The premise being a time of luxurious decadence instead of dystopia adds a new layer to Chrono Crusade as the dark fantasy strays away from what's familiar, dives into a more unique setting. It's not super fantastical, but with demons, you can tell that it's not exactly rooted in reality either. And obviously, there's also the moral dilemma between the demonic entities and the church, as the two factions coexisting is like expecting oil to mix with water. One of our favorite bits of imagery pops up in the 7th episode, known as The Devil, where the state of Mary cried blood with the appearance of the red moon, while disasters that the Bible had prophesied occurred with the return of the dead. So, dark fantasy aside, Chrono Crusade also dabbles in gothic horror, adding that extra spice to the story. And to make everything more intense in pure dark fantasy fashion, Chrono has a parasitic contract with Rosette, as every use of his power takes away a bit from Rosette's lifespan. Once again, we see the recurring theme of a tragic end. Pet Shop of Horrors, 1999. Another of our personal favorites on this list, we're talking about the josei dark fantasy known as Pet Shop of Horrors. It has an interesting premise with Count D, an androgynous Chinese man owning a pet shop in Washington, D.C.'s Chinatown. Except, the pets he sells are exotic and borderline mythical, the point that they can fulfill all of your desires. The customer's job is to sign a contract, however, with each contract having 3 rules you cannot break. Across all rules, one seems consistent. instant. The customer cannot reveal their pet to anyone else, and there's a reason for this. The pets take on the human form of the people the customers are looking for, a dead daughter, a dead lover, and so on. Other times it has a human face, such as the lizard from the 3rd episode who was based on Medusa. Each of these creatures is based on a particular character in mythology and folklore, be it the yokai-based rabbits or Kirin from East Asian mythology. But the customer can never show the face of their pet to an outsider due to each pet looking humanoid as a result of some strange magic. If another person were to see it, they would think it's just a tiny 4-legged animal. And of course, if that were to happen, the purchaser would begin to feel the same as well. However, in each episode or chapter, rules are broken, fantasies are shattered, and Count D is hunted down by a detective who never has enough proof to book him but is sure of his involvement and even gets the final laugh. The story bends normal reality while sticking to a very natural and realistic writing style. Vampire Princess Miyu, 1988. Oh yes, some good old Yuri with this entry. Vampire Princess Miyu is a 1988 OVA that adapts Toshiki Hirano and Narumi Kakinouchi's horror manga series. Miyu is shown as the child of a vampire mother and a human mother born in a post-World War II Japan. She eventually loses her parents and becomes a guardian or a watcher. There's a television series that has the roles flipped, but Miyu is a guardian nonetheless. Eventually, Miyu grew curious about her history and her parents, but she grows up feeling extremely isolated. That is, until she meets Larva, her Western Shinma companion. But wait, there's tragedy here too. Miyu's job was to hunt down stray Shinma and send them back to the darkness, but she eventually finds out that her father was a Shinma too, that is, a god demon with love for causing havoc, bringing in the much-awaited plot points with respect to struggling with identity and morals, causing the audience to go through the same journey. The story not only has dark fantasy with its supernatural elements, such as vampires and demons, but it also dives into body horror, gothic atmospheres, and a tragic love between Miyu and Larva. The emotional weight of the events of the story is what makes an otherwise simplistic anime so impactful. There's nihilism, mythic fatalism, and just doomed fate in general. Vampire Princess Miyu doesn't get the clout that it deserves if you ask us, and I think that's really sad. It hits way above its weight. The story is very melancholic, and it's not trying to be lighthearted or use sarcasm. Miyu's character stands out a lot because she's not a run-of-the-mill perfect protagonist. She's not a heroic vampire, but instead refers to herself as an immortal guardian who has an endless duty. But being a vampire comes with immortality, and due to that, the fate of a vampire will never be a bright one. Deadman Wonderland, 2011. Finally, we want to wrap this list up with the 2011 release Deadman Wonderland. The story is based on a massive anomaly in the ecosystem which results in Japan facing an intense earthquake which ravages Tokyo and most of mainland Japan. The majority of the city sank into the Pacific Ocean, and long story short, the premise is what's ideally and stereotypically considered to be dystopian. After 10 years, 9th grader Ganta Igarashi, who has no memory of the events due to the trauma and tragedy it caused him, gets a red crystal shard embedded into him by a mysterious floating person drenched in blood. He is eventually put on trial for being the culprit behind the great tragedy, which sounds crazy, but bear with us. All the evidence here is rigged against him, and Ganta is sentenced to death at a prison known as Deadman Wonderland, which doubles as a theme park. In the prison, Ganta participates in lethal games to acquire more caste points, the existence of which helps him counter a lethal poison which has been injected into his bloodstream. During this time, Ganta is also tasked with finding the Red Man so that he can clear his own name. In the process of everything, Ganta ends up learning how to manipulate his blood and weaponize it, making him the titular Deadman. But this only leads to him participating in more brutal gladiatorial matches, riddling Ganta's life with survival tactics. A prison operating as a theme park, and vice versa, is a standout concept that we personally can't recall ever seeing before. That said, this show never got a second season, which definitely hampered its popularity. Marvelous Verdict. Dark fantasy challenges comfort by ensuring the characters either meet a tragic fate or get what they want, but at a cost where things just aren't worth it anymore. As such, the genre is far from being a light watch, which is what's likely to get the most attention in modern society due to TikToks and Reels just absolutely ruining our attention spans. This is kind of heartbreaking in a way, as dark fantasy is a genre that needs to be loved and dissected. We hope you enjoyed this video because your support helps us bring you even more of the content you love. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time in our next marvelous video.